If you don't want to escalate a war, stop.
Global master mediator Thaddeus Hollis has facilitated thousands of disputes and conflicts in his illustrious career.
Originally from Bermuda, he has crossed the globe and landed in Australia to help people get better results in their lives.
As a strong proponent of mutual benefit, Thad remains a formidable negotiator, tackling issues ranging from industrial and labor disputes to conflict resolution.
Despite his quiet demeanor, Thaddeus knows when to intensify his efforts to achieve better outcomes for his clients.
The concept of win-win is always the best outcome. The concept of win-lose is that when someone loses, they're going to remember that they lost.
Today he coaches and teaches others how to get a better outcome in their own negotiation, and has also coached many clients through their separation and divorce.
With a wealth of knowledge regarding mediation and negotiation, Thad is keen to share what he has learned across decades with you today.
In this episode of People with a Passion.
Thad, who needs mediation?
I would say anytime that you're in an impasse, when you're negotiating a contract, negotiating something that you want as an outcome. So it can work in commercial, it can work with family, it can work when people are separating and they're talking about time with the kids. If they can't get to an agreement, I find that my experience has been bringing in a third party as a neutral person to sort of help them navigate the ins and outs of what can often be a very difficult emotional discussion.
How do people come to you seeking mediation?
People come in pain, emotionally distraught, sometimes angry. Those are just what they're presenting. Usually it's profound sadness that's behind it. There's a sense of loss and they're grieving. I'll get a call from somebody and saying, look, I'm trying to get an agreement with my spouse and I don't know where to go with that. And so we'll do a 15-minute call and say, look, if you think this doesn't work, we'll engage, we'll do the process, and I'll work them through what they're stuck on. And often it's just a pain point. And, I'm just absolutely devastated. This is happening. I don't know what to do. And it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's the person that initiated the separation. Sometimes it's the person who's receiving it. There's a pain point for both sides. But it's when they're at that, I don't know how to communicate. I don't know what to say.
Are mediation and negotiation the same thing? Are they synonyms?
No, they're very different. Negotiation is when parties will negotiate a new contract. Like when you're buying a car, you negotiate with the auto dealer, right? So you get the agent, you're going to, I want some floor mats. I want to put some, I want to do some little bits and pieces. Can I get different tires? So you're negotiating those things as part of it. And they'll decide what they want to throw in. So it's often what they call the B.A.T.A.N.A, the best alternative to a negotiated outcome, is to see what you can get to in terms of what you want. Now, mediation is you've now reached an impasse where both parties cannot get to that agreement, that they can't find the common ground, and then they'll invite a third party, someone like me, to come in and help them find, where their language is broken down or they've got a misunderstanding, and what can they find in common to get to an agreement that may not have even realized was an alternative for them.
Yeah. What was that acronym?
B.A.T.A.N.A, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Right? And it came out of Stephen Fry. It was Urey and Fry, both Harvard professors, and they wrote this in the early 90s. And it's Getting to Yes was the book.
Yeah.
And I had a copy. I actually had one signed by him, by Urey, because he came, I went to a webinar he did, a workshop he did, sorry. And it was fascinating. But it's thinking outside the box, because we often go into a negotiation saying, I want this. And it's what you want, but is it really what you need? And then if you start working a different perspective and realize that, I really wanted the car green, but how much do I want the green paint? Maybe I can go with a metallic. It gives you your options. Or I really wanted those leather seats. Well, is there another option that you would be happy with?
You coach people how to negotiate. What are the core things that people must know before they start a negotiation?
Be willing to walk away, right? Because if you're really emotionally attached to getting to it, you are going to get an emotional outcome. Like buying a house, for all of us, buying our first homes, the home we're going to live in, really, really important. We're attached to it. We really want that. We have all our dreams and aspirations tied into that. And it's really hard to sort of say, I can walk away.
Yeah.
Because how important really is it? Because there's always going to be another house.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be another. So, yeah, we get caught up emotionally in what we're looking for.
So would you say emotion is one of the biggest challenges and or mistakes people come leading into a mediation or a negotiation that
Let me just say, mediation is a facilitated negotiation with a third party. So it's the same process in which people are still in control, but the mediator helps them get the conversation or dialogue flowing. Now, we all have emotions. We all get attached to things. We all create that attachment that what I really want from this. And it's, as a mediator, it's to help them understand when they're negotiating, how important is that? Is that going to be really important to you in 10 years' time?
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. So considering right now how you're feeling about the situation you're in, you're getting them to project their thoughts about how this decision will look in the future. Is that
It's always thinking, because right now, the only thing we have control over is our present. But we always drag our past. Everyone has a past that they bring in, and that's the experiences they bring, the understanding they bring, but it's not really relevant to the now. And all it is an experience which we attach feelings to, and those feelings then give us our prejudices, our judgments, what we desire. And if we can just pause those for a minute and say, well, how important is this really? Right? Like, my reputation's really important. Well, is your reputation going to be important 20 years from now? Because think back to what you were like 20 years ago. And what do you really need from this? And what is it going to be what you can live with?
Yeah.
And then you can build from that. So what's the minimum and what is it the desired outcome? And most of us will go somewhere in between. And it's a varying degree. If you think from 0 to 100, most people will try and settle somewhere between 60 and 70.
So is compromise a key part of negotiation? Like, do you have to be willing to make some sacrifices to get what you want?
Always be willing to give up that thing that you think's important. Because I've actually been a negotiator for enterprise agreements for trade unions. And I've represented employers, and it's been part of my practice that I've had for years, as well as being the mediator. But it's getting there, what we put on the table isn't often what we want. We put that in there to see if to test the waters. And that's pretty well the way everyone negotiates.
Yes.
We put something on the table and say, well, are you going to bite that? Okay, well, I can give that away because what I'm really going to now put on the table is this.
So coming in as a mediator, I guess you're coming in objectively.
So to help people understand that, I have no interest in their outcome. It's up to them what they negotiate. I'm actually literally impartial. They've told me what they want. I ask lots of questions because I like to think outside the box sometimes and just take people outside of their comfort.
Yeah.
Because it's in our discomfort we can explore the possibilities, and their possibilities become more infinite than when we're just, okay, this is what I have to have. And it's like, well, do you really? What is it that you really need in this process? And it works with parenting plans as well. So when I have a couple separating and they're trying to work out a parenting plan, well, I need to have my son every weekend. Okay. Well, what does that look like? How are you going to do that? What is it that you can do with that? So I just ask questions so that we can flesh it out, because you're going to have to put a proposal on the table. So what does that proposal look like? And as they just start to think it out, they go, well, actually, if I could get a couple of nights and then every other, so what am I? So they start seeing what other things they could do rather than what I need. Comes, well, how's that in the best interest of your kid? Which is the only thing, that's what I love with the Family Law Act in Australia, is that it's always what's in the best interest of the kids. Because, by the way, parents, you've had your bit. Your job is to make sure your kids are safe, healthy, and well.
Sometimes people use, sadly, kids as a pawn in that negotiation and or as a means of getting back, say, at someone. So we'll talk about that concept because there's two similar concepts. One is reciprocity. I give you something with an expectation something's in return.
Yep.
Then we have tit for tat, which is a little bit more aggressive. You do this to me, so I'm going to do this to you. Can you speak to those strategies that people that you're working with may employ and where there's advantages and disadvantages, and do both actually work? Like, are they strategies that can work, or is there
That high conflict, I'm going to get vengeance, never gets an outcome that's anyone's going to be happy with. Because when you actually take everything away from the other side, the concept of win-win is always the best outcome. The concept of win-lose is that when someone loses, they're going to remember that they lost. And they're never going to feel they got a good deal. So my role as a mediator is to ensure that win-lose doesn't happen. Both sides kind of come out of the agreement feeling that they've gotten what they needed. They may not have got everything they want, because I often said, if I got everything I wanted, I wouldn't know what to do with it. And frankly, I really don't want it most of the time. It's just I think I do. And so using the example, I need to have my son every weekend, is that, well, do you? And why is that? And how does that work? And what does he need? Right? But it's also, well, I need her to, because weekends are important to her, and that's the only time she gets off work. But if I can take him away.
Do you ever have anyone verbalize that, actually state that, or is that something you just know is underlying? Or is it both?
Sometimes it happens, and depending on the relationship with their partner, sometimes it can be right in their face because they really want to hurt the other team. And that's when I've got to sort of pull them apart, put them into private session. There's a formula that we follow in mediation, but I'll put people into private session if I really think safety is important, because it's really important that when you're in that sort of sensitive negotiation, that you feel safe, that you feel heard, and that you're given the voice to be heard. Because often, I'm being heard, but do you have a voice in this?
There's sort of taking them through this process they might not even be aware of like a cost benefit analysis of where they're coming from. So
to your point, imagine that we did this with lawyers in the room. And I've done legally assisted mediation, but if you didn't have a mediator there and it was just the two lawyers doing that, chances are that you'd be doing this over a series of days. It's unusual for me to do a mediation that takes more than 4 hours. Sometimes it's a whole day. Often, if I've done my job in what we call the intake and prepping them for the mediation, I'll spend anywhere from 90 minutes, sometimes to 2 hours, talking to them. Well, what do they really want? How's this process working? What my role is, and what they can do as a negotiated outcome. If I do my job properly, we can get to the mediation session, and often in 2 hours, get to an outcome.
What advice would you give to someone who is going through a separation or divorce? First thing you would say to them?
I would say, come talk to someone like me. I'm also a divorce coach. And the reason why I got into that was I've had a couple of clients that I've coached through the divorce, is putting a team around them. And they say, oh, look, I just can't afford all of this. I'll say, well, let's just book up 6 sessions. One case, we booked up 12 sessions. And it was, okay, you need a counselor. Let's get your tax accountant involved. Certainly get your solicitor involved. Let's get, you're going to need a therapist to work out some of the stuff with the kids. And the kids are going to need that. And how are you going to do language? I actually had someone that had already been divorced. And we agreed to use 3 sessions just to talk around it. And it worked really well. They went in 3 months, from exchanging expletives with each other and fighting over time with the kids, to actually getting a parenting plan together and agreeing to things and stop swearing at each other. And because, if you don't want to escalate a war, stop. It sounds ridiculously simple.
Emotions is what affects our ability to say this isn't going to work if we escalate.
And that's where having someone who's impartial, who's outside of the emotion, sit there and say, okay, let's talk through what this is. I like it in conflict resolution, where you're dealing with stuff in the workplace, where you ask someone, Well, you're really frustrated with your boss. What would you like to see happen? I want his head on a platter and I want him fired. I said, okay, so now we've done that. Now he's his head on a platter and he's fired. Now what?
Mm.
What's the next thing? And it's like, well, okay, now, well, I don't know. Okay, so you know that's not going to happen. So what do you want next? Now, what is it that you really need here? And that's where the dialogue always happens because our emotions tell us to go, we're going to nuke the bastards. We're going to take it to the nth degree. We're going to, burn the earth and everyone's going to pay for it. That's okay. Okay. So now we can dial that back. And I have found in even working with juveniles that, parents are involved, people who spray graffiti, they get caught. Juveniles sitting there going, it was a lark. They didn't mean to do any harm. It was just something they wanted to do. I mean, they're 13 years old. Their brains aren't engaged with what their actions are. But, we tend to put adult thinking onto an adolescent body and thinking, well, they've got to behave properly. And I was like, well, I don't know about you, but I didn't.
Yeah. At a young age. No,
Yeah.
not fully developed. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I also do mediation for conciliation because it's under the statute with Queensland government and with homeowners and contractors. And both sides also have an emotional investment. The contractor's proud of what they've built and they're really offended that someone says that they've done shoddy work.
Yeah.
The homeowner says, I've just built my dream home and it's not to what I wanted.
Yeah.
Right? And it's working through that emotional energy that both sides have and getting them into private session, getting them to understand that maybe not, this is important. What is it that was really there? Is there an alternative way to correct this? Is there something that you could live with? Is there something that isn't as important that you could give up? And it's getting them to really hear that and then bringing them to the table and having that discussion because they felt safe.
Mm-hmm.
So while they're very different, like a homeowner and someone going through a divorce are very different on the spectrum of emotion. It's very similar in terms of the process of having a voice, being heard, and feeling safe. There's words that happen in a mediation that are really key. When the parties are sitting across from each other, it's like, what's a really important phrase? When I hear this, I know we're the point where we're beginning to get to an outcome that's going to get to an agreement. Is I'm sorry. When someone hears that, it's a point of vulnerability and the other side receives it, it's suddenly like, oh. And that changes the dynamic of the negotiation to better.
Mm-hmm. Is that because it's almost when someone says they're sorry, they are at a crossroad of forgiveness and acceptance of that person coming from that place of vulnerability, and human nature is we probably don't want to look like an a-hole.
Yeah.
So we have to take it for what it is, which is a genuine appeal of saying, hey, I'm sorry.
It never happens right in the beginning of a mediation.
Mm.
It's usually once we've gotten through the process and we're into the discovery mode where we're putting things on the table and emotions have come up. And when they start to get into negotiation, they share things. And someone goes, I had no idea. You felt that way.
Mm.
I'm so sorry if I, I just didn't know that. When they hear that, it suddenly shifts. I've watched the anger dissipate.
What would you suggest to people who don't want to escalate to the point they need a mediator or a lawyer? What are some of the strategies they can employ if they see there is a conflict and to resolve it for themselves?
And they're feeling that they're starting to hit a wall.
Mm.
Right? So they're like, I'm trying to put things on the table and it's just being batted back. It's to now start asking questions of not just themselves, but the other side and say, look, I think I'm putting my best options on the table, but that's not working for you. What is it that I can meet or what is it that I can offer that's going to help you get to what you need from this process? And that feels really dangerous because you're being vulnerable.
Mm.
But it's in vulnerability we get our outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the irony, is that we think we've got to be, those fierce warriors and calling on a politician like a Donald Trump, rattle the sabers and beat everybody up. but that doesn't get you to a negotiated outcome. What that will do is get the other party to suddenly go, well, I'm not going to sit there and give anything. Why should I? But if you say, hang on, I'm willing to compromise on some of the things I'm holding. And as a gesture of good faith, here's something I'm willing to put on the table that I'm willing to give. The other side, maybe, oh, I'll just take that. And then okay, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. Then we're done. But in the interest of trying to find a negotiated settlement without involving a mediator, our lawyers, going to, QCAT to try and get a settlement and have a tribunal then rule on this, can we not control this ourselves? So it takes only one party to sort of stand back and go, this isn't working for me. I don't know how it's feeling for you. And it's talking in a calm voice, because when we're escalated and we're leaning in and we're pounding the table, the other side responds. It's because it does take two to tango.
So I notice your demeanor is actually quite quiet and relaxing too, and calming. So I can see how that would benefit someone in a role like mediation.
I think the hardest thing is helping people understand that there's a grieving process. Because, when people get married, they don't think about, well, I'm going to separate from this guy and or a girl, and I'm going to take them to the cleaners in 20 years. It's like we get married thinking we're going to get married forever. It's a fairy tale. And when it breaks down, we're grieving the loss of what was the future. And as a mediator, it's not in my remit to do that, but I want the parties to acknowledge that there's some loss here. Because if they can do that, then they soften to the point that, yeah, I'm really sad this is over. Because, give you an example, the very first family mediation I ever did was, I don't know, must have been 25 years ago. I asked them about their wedding day. They'd been divorced for 2 years. They were trying to figure out how to take care of their daughter, and they were at an impasse. And so someone suggested they come to me. They had lawyers involved. That was costing them a fortune. I'm not paying any more money. So they came to me, and we had 2 sessions, 2-hour sessions. And the first one, they were at about an hour in. I'm like, okay, this isn't working. So I said, you know what, guys? I sat back and I went, I got a question for the two of you. What was your wedding day like? What was the weather like? Right? So I had them revisit this memory. And I said, so what was it like when you exchanged vows? How did you look at each other? And I watched both of them physically and visibly soften, look at each other and went, yeah. We don't like each other now, but maybe we can work this through. And they came back to the next session and reached an agreement, financial settlement, the whole thing, how they wanted to handle things. But they spent 2 years in legal fees and a whole bunch of angst and emotion. And inside a week, they were able to put it to bed just because I asked them a question. Voice is really important as a mediator. It's keeping the ground feeling safe, because if I get excited, they're going to get excited. If I stay calm, chances are they'll stay calm. As a negotiator, I'll lean in and put ridiculous things on the table and see what I can do to poke the bear. Right? And then once I get to that point where it's an impasse and we think we might need mediation, I go, you know what? I'm going to put this on the table, because a good negotiator already knows what the other side is looking for. And in a negotiation, it's like, I know what I want, but I also have to anticipate what they want, because if it's only going to be, it's playing chess.
Now, let's take a short break to share some software we recommend.
Hey, StreamYard is my go-to platform for creating this podcast. What makes StreamYard a game changer is its ease of use. It's actually the reason I chose it myself, is because it seamlessly allows me to invite guests to record on my podcast. Now, if you're someone who's looking to go live to multiple platforms at the same time, then you really need to consider whether StreamYard's for you. The other thing it offers is local recording, which allows me to separate my files and my guest files, so I have full creative control over the process. They're constantly adding new features, including an AI generator that now generates short form content with captions from the long form videos that I record on the platform. If you're someone who's looking to start a podcast, or perhaps you're in business and you want to create a webinar, then StreamYard has a tier for you, including a free option, which gives you no excuse not to give it a try today. So if you want to level up your own content creation, then make sure you check out my affiliate link in the description below, and you can get started creating with StreamYard today.
Now, let's get back to our guest.
So how do you said you know or assess what the other person wants?
Because of what you exchange as proposals.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
You can see it in there,
Yeah.
more or less.
So you start to say, okay, these are things that I would give away. These are things that I would imagine they would give away. It's also having the experience. And by I'd say the second meeting, you should be in a position to understand what you really want to hold on to and what you're willing to give up,
Yep.
knowing that they have the same agenda. Because there are certain things that you really do need to be firm on. And then also, depending on how the other side is, be transparent. And I have found in my experience that the sooner we can get to the transparency, the quicker we're going to resolve. So we don't spend, when I started in labor relations as a assistant shop steward at the age of 19, we would spend years negotiating. It could be 18 months to 2 years to negotiate an agreement. I've actually negotiated a 5-year agreement in 2 hours. Right.
So what cost is there when it takes 18 months to negotiate something? Like, there's got to be some...
Well, from the worker's perspective, I'm being paid
yeah.
time to go there, so it doesn't cost me anything. From the employer, right, I'm paying guys not to be productive. I'm paying a team to be sitting there. I've got management sitting at the table. You know, how important it is. I've been the management team. When I was a director of HR leading negotiations, and I'm sitting there and I have to go to my executive and the board and go, guys, we can continue fighting this, but for 0.25%, we could put this to bed and everyone goes back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, oh no, we got to stand firm on this. I'm going, how much sense does that make when you add up the salaries that are in that room right now, that it's going to take us 3 years to make that money back, 0.25%.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, is like the cost that goes with not getting to a resolution is sometimes not in the equation, I guess, in their minds of the people, because the emotions are tied to it.
Right. And in employment situations, employers are very aware of loss of productivity.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about a property settlement or I want my house fixed because, and it's a question that I've asked people, how important is this when you know that if you're going to take this all the way and it's going to go to a tribunal, that it could be 2 years away from now, and you're going to be carrying this, dragging this through you, and every day you look at it, it's going to be something that's where if you let the contractor in a case like that to do repairs, then those things are going to be not carried with you anymore. It's up to you. It's a decision that you make. And my experience is that people will fight for things. I've seen people spend on a boat dispute. The paint job they didn't like on the boat wasn't right, and it was a $20,000 paint job. But they spent 3 years in court and about $150,000 in legal fees.
Yeah.
To get their money back.
Yeah.
Like, well, because it was on principle. Socrates often said, you can drink the hemlock. Right?
There's a story where they say a raccoon, I think, puts their hand to get nuts or something out of a barrel, and they go in to get the food and they get beaten with a stick, but because they want the food, they won't
let go.
Let go. So they'll die before they realize all I've got to do to get away is release what's in my hand, and I can get my hand out of the hole.
Yes.
So
it's having that discussion. What's realistic? You can hire a lawyer and you can fight this all the way and, pay your solicitor by all means. But understand that you no longer have control of the process. You can direct your solicitor, but every time you talk to your solicitor, it's costing you money. And I've had family lawyers saying, I really want you to come in and help me with coaching my client because I'm not this therapist, I'm not this psychologist. They're calling me at 10 o'clock at night, and then they get upset when they get a bill.
Mm-hmm. Like, lawyers are going to understand legislation, and that's going to compound and add a whole level of complexity to a potential negotiation, I imagine, because they're coming from a legal standpoint, whereas having someone, I guess, who's a middleman, a mediator, who's not looking at the law, but rather looking exactly at two people's scenarios, is far better than being stuck in a legal framework. Is that correct? Is there more flexibility?
There's more flexibility. I have to, like when I'm dealing with couples who are separating, I have to work within the Family Law Act.
Yeah.
So I'm working within a legal framework. But as a mediator, I've often said mediation gives us an opportunity to look at the ridiculous, the sublime, and our truths, right? How can we then work around this? Whereas and I've worked at a law firm, when we're looking at it from a lawyer's perspective, it's like the act says this is cut and dry. I've got to now make a petition. I've got to put this together, get the particulars all drafted, and put it before the court. So it's very much black and white. Whereas I'm working with a relationship. Because particularly when there's kids involved, I like to remind them, this isn't just about what you're doing today with the kids. It's what's going to happen when they finish high school. What's going to happen when they get married? What are they going to happen? How are you going to handle the grandkids? And they all look at me and say, grandkids? I said, well, I hope this is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So you have a relationship that goes far beyond this moment. And it's always going to involve your children as long as they're in your lives. And if you want to include them in your life, then you want to make sure that what you plant now will grow into that. And while it works with families, it works with everything. Whatever we plant today, we want to make sure it grows well. And I use that car analogy again, right? You go to an auto dealer who had a really good experience with, you're going to go, chances are you're going to go back. So they know that in sales, but it's about you've established a relationship. If that agent leaves and goes to another auto dealer, you might go find him because you have a relationship. Working with a real estate agent, a good real estate agent creates a relationship. And as a mediator, my job is to facilitate that relationship between the parties. Right? My relationship with the parties is not material. Right? I don't need to have a relationship with them. My role is to ensure that they're safe and they're heard and they have a voice.
You mentioned earlier framework, that you have a framework or a process that you guide people through, or through a mediation we'll talk about. So what does that look like? What is that framework, if you can share it?
Sure. It's in Queensland and under Australia national standards. We have a formula that we follow, and there's a double-sided pyramid. So we start with the intake with the parties, then we do the intake.
So what's the intake?
Intake is a conversation with the parties individually, separately, in which I as a mediator will get a feel about what they're looking for, what they really like to have as an outcome, what they're hoping to accomplish. I'll ask questions and get them prepared for what the process is and tell them what they need to bring. Because people say, well, do I need to bring all my documents? If you think it's going to help you negotiate, then by all means bring it to the table. Right? And then we have introductions. So when we start the process, there's introductions. There's a framing where we set up an agenda. And then we'll have a general discussion. And then at that point, once we've got the discussion around the agenda, we'll then start looking at, do we get into private session? Do we then get into the negotiation? How are we going to do that? And then work them through the process to then narrow down to get into an agreement. So it's like an 8-stage process. I can't remember exactly because I've been doing it so long, but it was a really helpful process. I was really impressed with the fact that if you want to know how to become a mediator, you can work through this process. And if you follow the model, it works most of the time. I also rely on my intuition, and it's not just experience. I call it that still small voice that sits on my shoulder that sort of says, something's not right. It's reading the body language. Whether I'm face to face or I'm doing it on Zoom, or I'm doing it on the telephone, it's like someone has an intake. So there's telltale signs that I listen for or look for that I'll use to sort of say, well, hang on. I want to ask you a question in mind. Do you want to have a break? Should we ask this in a private setting? Because I want them to feel safe. Because those are the points that if I just follow the formula directly, I might miss something. So it's listening for the nuances.
Yeah.
Some things are really straightforward. You can just cookie cutter right through, and it works really well, and you get to a good outcome. I like to get people to a better outcome. I did a mediation. We had one item, and it was about their daughter going to kindy. And we spent 8 hours, 2 sessions. I broke it up into 2 sessions. 8 hours just to discuss on attendance at kindy and which school it should be. because it was that much emotion and investment and exploration that had to happen, which is all part of the mediation process. But it was also allowing them the space to really express the love that they had for their daughter that they shared.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it was really hard for them because they hadn't spoken in a year. It had only been exchange of text. And we did it by Zoom, even though they could have gotten together. They really wanted to keep it safe. So we did it by Zoom. And it gave them opportunity to be comfortable at home, have a mug of tea, and ask questions, and be comfortable with that.
Is there anything you would tell someone who has the mindset of revenge or I don't want them to get anything? And is that workable at all? Like,
Yeah. First time I heard that was from a guy who was a bloke. He was telling me, I don't want her to get anything. I'm going to take everything, and she's getting nothing. I went, okay. You think that's fair? Absolutely. She cheated on me, and I said, okay. So I said, do you have kids? He says, yeah, got 3 boys. Love them to bits. I said, oh, great. So you have a great relationship with them? He said, how did they get on with their mom? Oh, good, I guess. I mean, they seem to get on okay. I said, do you think they love their mom? Yeah, I really do. I think they do love their mom. They must do, I guess, because that's their mom. I said, do you love your kids? Oh, I think the world of them. Everything. I said, so I'm going to ask you a question. If you love your kids and your kids love their mom, why would you treat their mom with such disrespect? It's hard. It's hard hitting. But I really needed to shock him into the fact that you're hurting your kids. You're not hurting her.
yeah.
Right? And that was like, oh shit. Okay. Let me rethink that. And I said, yeah, I said, because if you want to take it to court, the court's not going to let you take everything. You're going to go to court and the judge is going to look at it and go, yeah, no. Right? So why not? And so part of my role is to say, I'm not here to tell you legally what you can get, and you can go get legal advice around this, and the lawyer will tell you something, and the judge may or may not follow the same route. But what is going to be in the best interest of the kids? How is this going to be taking care of their needs in the future? And keep in mind that any agreement that you have around the children is going to be separate to a property settlement. So it's not necessarily going to be where your maintenance is, because that's already been agreed. So how are you going to do that? Or what is the factors in there? And what's the super? And there's so many things that come into the factors that when people say, I want to have the house. Well, why? What's the expectation around that? And what does that mean? Well, I need to feel that I have somewhere for my kids. It's going to be safe and it's going to be a home. Okay, so what would happen if you sold the house? So we'll start exploring other options. So I'll just ask. I don't tell them.
No,
this is
you
what
ask questions.
I ask the questions because it's to help them think, what are they going to put on the table as a proposal? Because if you just go in there saying, I'm going to have the house and you're not, chances are you're not going to get lawyers. You're going to end up in court. The court's going to look at it and go, okay, what we're going to do is do a compulsory order on you to now sell the property. And then neither party are happy because they've had an imposed order.
Yeah.
Where they negotiated something where it was like, well, you could buy me out, but the kids could still stay in the house. And, I've seen ones in which the parties have agreed to keep the house while the kids were finishing school and they would alternate staying there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a different outcome, isn't it?
Yeah. That's really,
it's not the one you normally hear about, but it might be easier to let the kids feel like they're at home and the parents actually are going between places on the weekend.
So they agreed they had a room that was locked, that was theirs, so each of them had their own.
Yeah.
And so they had the ability to do that. But that was completely outside of what they had come in with their expectations. And it was a creative outcome that worked. And knowing it was only for the short term, like we're only talking about 3 years, it wasn't like, okay, we're stuck with this forever. And understand, any agreement isn't a forever agreement. But what's the easier way to do this in spite of how you feel? Because it's going to cost you a lot. It's going to cost you emotionally a lot more than money. And he said the money wasn't a problem. He was willing to spend $1 million so that she couldn't get anything. And say, so, but at the end of the day, it's not going to get you a better relationship with your kids.
Yeah. It's almost like the saying that there's no winners in war, that he's going to war and he's prepared to lose everything as well, including the $1 million, meaning
Yeah.
it's not winner takes all, it's actually losers get nothing.
Get nothing. And,
We both lose. It's
and
not a good position to start from. So,
I've never seen the kids respect the parent that does that,
mhm.
regardless how old they are. You know, kids are really aware of what's going on around them, and they're really resilient. They bounce back quickly.
Yeah.
Parents have a harder time dealing with the divorce than the kids do. The kids adjust really quick. Okay, we got 2 homes, we got this. This isn't everything I want. I may have a Disneyland parent, but you know, and the Disneyland parent's the fun one, but the stability is with the one that doesn't. And kids adjust. They get used to it. They understand. It just takes time. The parents are the ones that have the hard time struggling with it.
Mhm. Have you ever been brought in to mediate for the child in the sense of you already doing that, I guess?
If it's there and it's important and the courts have directed it, I'll have a child therapist, a psychologist deal with that and let them do that. So I can focus on keeping the communication between the parents going and saying, you know, let's let someone who's a child assisted deal with that.
Mhm.
It's like I have counselors that I can refer people to. And, you know, each of us stay in our own lane, but it gives us a network, which then envelops the person going through the angst and the pain.
Yeah.
Because it is painful and it is sad and it is hard. And we don't talk about, a lot of it's just about the numbers and finance, but that's only part of it. There's an emotional toll, there's a spiritual toll, there's a physical toll, there's a mental toll. And, you know, a lot of that has a lag time. The loss that people experience and the grief that they have, and all the stages of grief still have to happen, but there's a PTSD that happens sometimes. And we don't acknowledge it because what happens is we'll jump into another relationship just to fix things. And then sometimes they come back as to looking for mediation again in a few years because it wasn't the solution. I think if you can help the person, as a mediator, I can't do that. Mediator, I'm really in my role to be impartial, facilitate a conversation between the parties. That's why I got into the coaching side of family, because it's sitting down with one party, and if one party's doing healthy work, it does bleed over into the other side.
Mhm.
It does change the negotiation. It does change how they communicate. It does change what they're looking for. Because it's like I was saying, in a negotiation, if I say I become immediately vulnerable, it does change the tempo.
Yeah. So perspective is something I've noticed as you've been speaking, that you're also trying to either change the perspective of the individual who needs to arrive at an outcome. So both parties need to arrive, but you speak to the perspective of, you know, do you love your kids? That's shifting their mindset from what they think's important to perhaps what is really important. So how important is it to understand or shift perspectives in negotiation? Because that's what seems to be
As a mediator, I don't try and change it
no.
so much as to help them be aware of alternative perspectives that they could look at. Like that example I did, I don't know, 25, almost 30 years ago with that dad, was to shock him into, mate, you're not going to get an outcome here that's going to help.
Mhm.
Right? So it did bring an awareness, and I let him go ahead and do his own negotiation. He got a lawyer, and yeah, the wife got fair treatment, he got fair treatment, and the kids were healthy and happy. That's a good outcome. I wasn't mediating, but it was sort of like, mate, let's not go down that route. But to help people shift their perspective, because when we're emotionally involved in our outcome,
You mentioned you've done this for a long time. Originally, you're from Bermuda and you've done work with unions there,
Yeah.
and you also worked with US mediation,
yep.
and now you're here in Australia. So, do you want to speak to some of your experience and some of the things you have actually negotiated?
Sure. I actually still have unions I represent in Bermuda, and we do everything via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the lead negotiator on a new agreement with the Bermuda government on behalf of one of the unions. And we're going into negotiations. We've already managed to get the wage settlement out of the way. We're looking at putting an agreement on the table with the government, and we have some proposals that we're going to be giving to them. I anticipate some pushback. We're going to, start high. They're going to start low. We're going to meet somewhere on that spectrum. We both know that, but we have a dance that we have to do because it's part of a role that we play.
Yeah.
Right? And that's particularly between unions and employers, is a little role play. But I expect that we'll have it wrapped up in 3 meetings because I know the lead negotiator on the other side, and we've had experience before, and he's a good fellow. He knows what he's doing.
Should you be meeting in the middle? Like, is there any right?
We always say meet in the middle, right? But the middle is it's like, what is an average?
Yeah.
Right? An average is the sum of all of these possibilities, but it's never actually the real number because we live on a gradient.
Yeah.
Life is not a 50-50.
Yeah.
Right? Everything that we do always has a percentage, a percentile. So there are things like, I mean, I love chocolate and food, but there are things like if I had a choice between dark chocolate ice cream or milk chocolate, I might choose the dark, but what is my spectrum? Right? So if I'm buying a car, going back to that analogy, it is how important is the make and the model and all the accessories. What is it that I really want? Well, I want a car to take me from A to B. What do I need in that car? Now, what do I want to add to it? And what could I give away? So I'll go in there and say, I want all these luxury items, and then I have a budget.
Yeah.
Right? So I go between those two extremes, and the middle isn't necessarily the split.
Yeah.
The middle might be more one way or the other, and that's how most things are negotiated. Like when you're doing a salary negotiation with your boss at work, you go in there saying, I'm worth 50,000 a year more because I'm actually brilliant. And your employer looks at you and goes, well, I'm willing to give you a pay increase, but here's $1,000, right?
Yeah.
And you go, well, So the meeting in the middle isn't going to be at the $25,000 mark, but it might be at around 6,000. And that might be what you agree to as an annual increase, given that the target, so both sides get something they want from it without giving up everything. One of the early mediations I did as part of my training, thinking back, it was in 1994. I was working with the U.S. Federal Mediation and Conciliation Services, and I'd already been on the job in Bermuda for about a year already, but they sent me for training. So I was in Chicago, and it was U.S. steel workers representing factory workers, and it was a small matter, but there was a strike. And the reason why the federal was involved, because it involved the Pentagon and then certain armaments that needed to be made, and it was an expert tool and die factory. And they were at an impasse, and they couldn't get anywhere, and they needed the help of a mediator. And this is not an untypical situation. What it came down to was the new owners had bought the factory, and the new owners weren't from the United States, and something had been heard on the factory floor, and it got misinterpreted. Now, the factory workers were made up of African Americans and Polish descent and Lithuanian descent, and so they were very proud of all their heritage, but they were a team. And they were a close-knit team that had to work together for safety, but it was grandfathers and fathers and sons, so it was multi-generational as well. So all of this is happening, and I'm in private session. I'm breaking off into groups with them, and this is back long enough ago when we all carried pictures of our families in our wallet rather than we didn't have smartphones.
Yeah.
So I'm showing, they're curious. I'm a curiosity. You're from Bermuda. What are you doing here? Sort of thing. So we start talking. Oh, you got kids? Yeah, I'll show pictures of my kids. The owner showed me pictures of their family. Oh, that's great. So we go back into the session. And I'm getting a feel for what they want to settle for and what they're willing to give and what they're willing to not give. We go back into a session with the workers, and I listen to the same thing from them, and then I call everyone together to get back to the table. Now, we'd started at 10 a.m. This is now like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is one of my early cases that I did. They're still at loggerheads. There's some intense dislike at the table would be an understatement, okay? Because there's overtures of racism that are being played out. So I said, well, let's take a break. We'll go to the proverbial water cooler. We'll go over there, have a little cup of coffee, have a chat. And then I said, hey, did I show you pictures of my family? And I said, no. And so we did that and said, oh, do you have your pictures? So what I did was I got everyone to exchange pictures of the kids. And so the workers look at the owners and they go, well, who's this? And they, is that your maid? And they go, no, that's our daughter-in-law. And these are our grandkids. And and they went, they're not white. And I went, no. 30 minutes later, we had an agreement. The strike was over and it was a misunderstanding that had its origins on the factory floor that led to 2 months of not working.
Yeah.
I use that as a big example, but it so much happens in families. It happens in the workplace all the time that, strikes generally start at the shop floor. Our misunderstanding doesn't start because our spouse didn't squeezes the toothpaste in the middle. It starts with something else that's happening that we feel that we're not getting our needs met.
Yeah.
And all of that is the genesis. And so what I love about the process of mediation is that we get to peel it back a bit, take us back in time and get an understanding. What is it that's doing that? And, I get to do a little bit more of that when I'm assisting people in how to negotiate, or if I'm assisting them as a divorce coach, I can do that. So it's coaching people into understanding that what you're feeling right now isn't necessarily the problem. That what you're experiencing is a perception of something that's been an injustice to you, that you wish to correct. And that comes into your negotiation, and that's preventing you from getting to that better outcome.
From what you've just described there, it's like you feel disadvantaged in some way. That then does it, and can it often come out of that feeling of disadvantage, or
it's again our feelings, right? So if we feel that we've been slighted, or we feel that we've been hurt in some way, we're going to, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Yeah, and so when we become highly agitated, angry, or annoyed, we're not in our best thinking. It's that reptilian brain down at the base here that suddenly goes in and goes, I'm going to fight, flight, or freeze, right? Which means that you're not going to be negotiating in your best temperament, your best mind. And that's where the willing to walk away puts you into an impartial state. It gives you that objectivity to say, well, how important is that? Because when we're emotionally involved in our outcome, an example I have is a mentor of mine. He was the president of the American Arbitration Association. He also had worked with Nelson Mandela in setting up their industrial relations alternative dispute system. And he was in Egypt, and he wanted to buy this rug. Fell in love with the rug, had to buy it. The guy was asking, let's just say $100 for it. And he's reaching in his pocket. His wife goes, no, we're not going to pay $100. He says, honey, I really love this rug. Right? No. She starts saying, that's an insult. They start this whole haggling back and forth, the whole thing, right? And pays $10 for it. Everyone's happy. She's happy. The seller's happy. He's like a bystander. Now, here's the guy who has been doing arbitration for 40 years, has been a mediator, has been negotiated, has been an advisor to presidents around the world. And he was telling me, when you're emotionally involved in the negotiation, you never get the best outcome.
Yeah.
Because you can't see what you really need. So be willing to walk away, but also stand back. And so when I've had to negotiate for myself, I fired me. And I've hired the other persona who's a really good negotiator, who goes in there and isn't emotionally attached to an outcome. Doesn't care, is completely objective and goes, what is it that you need here? And I go, really? No, you don't. We're going to look at what is, and you're going to be willing to walk away. And I actually have to think that through for my own process when I'm negotiating. When we were negotiating to buy a house here, it was the same process. I was like, okay, what am I willing to pay? What do I really need here? And am I willing to walk away? And we did walk away on our buy. Because I felt that they were asking way too much money. So we looked at another house, and that came in, and we could work with it. And it was, well, what? Ironically, the next day after we settled, the other seller calls us and says, "Look, I'm really interested. I can drop it by the 20,000." No, it's too late.
Yeah.
And I wasn't emotionally attached. It would have been lovely to have had it, but at the same time, as what I have now worked out far better.
Right. And often it can.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is you don't know what you're giving up by not actually just making a decision today as opposed to leaving and dragging something on for a long period of time. That was I said that cost benefit analysis you do for yourself in making a decision.
Which is the idea that if I get everything I want, I'll often find that I'm not going to be satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really is that philosophy that I work with the principle of gratitude, that, I don't have a big 5-bedroom house. Well, I don't need a 5-bedroom house, right? I have everything I need and actually more. And I live really comfortably and I'm content. And I was trying to explain to someone the difference between being ecstatically happy and being content. Contentment is that I am happy, that I have that I need. And yeah, there's pulls and tugs, and life doesn't always deliver everything I want. But on the whole, I can be satisfied. And it's like, if we can just do that in so many things, then, I don't need a Mercedes. I have a Mitsubishi.
Mm.
And it does the same thing. Now, I love to own one, but at the same time, what do I need a car for?
Mm-hmm.
And I have things in the car that I feel are luxury, that are really comfortable, that came along with the accessories. The house that I live in has things that I really love in it. We've added things to it to make us feel that we have those things. Now, I've looked at other homes and I'm, that'd be lovely to have. But at the same time, I'd have to do a lot more upkeep, but I have more electricity bills. So what am I really giving up?
Mm-hmm.
So it's looking there and saying, I really have everything I need.
As you're sharing your perspective on, Mercedes, Mitsubishi, I don't wear watches too often, and when I do, they're like $7 or $40 watches, right? My nephew has a watch that he got for graduation that's worth a couple of $1,000, and my brother, who's since passed, had a $400, $500 watch, and they taunt their watches, I guess, say, nice watch, nice watch. And I just say to them, what time does your watch say? And they give me the time, and I look at mine and go, yeah, mine too.
I didn't wear a watch for years.
Mm.
And then when my dad died in 2020, I inherited the watch.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a Rolex.
Mm.
Right. But it's not a Rolex my grandfather bought.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Rolex that the guys that worked for him when he retired in 1959 bought for him.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a tribute to the man he was.
Yeah.
And the principles that he taught my father, who taught me. And I had the privilege of working alongside my grandfather as a teenager, and he was in his 70s,
mm-hmm.
and we're cutting down trees.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. So the work.
So, it's not the value of the watch as much as it's something that reminds me of the principles that I was taught and the values that have been instilled, is that be thankful for what you have. And, an honest day's work gives you an honest day's outcome. And if you can go put your head on the pillow at night and know that you've done your best.
Yeah.
And I love this in the 4 Agreements. Don Miguel Ruiz wrote the book, The 4 Agreements. And it says in there, do your best every day. One of the agreements. And understand that your best yesterday might be not as good as your best today, because you're not feeling 100%.
Yeah.
It's not about the outcome. It's about the intent and the effort.
Mm.
And I feel that if I do that in everything that I approach, and as a mediator, I'm always looking for, and my partner Vicky laughs at me because I'm always a little nervous, because I want to make sure that I'm giving my best to ensure that the parties have what they need, not what I need. Because what I need is for them to feel that they're safe, they're heard, and they have a voice.
Yeah.
That's my rule. And I want to make sure that they have those things. Outside of that, it's really up to them.
Yeah, I spoke with a millionaire actually who bought and sold Yankee Stadium in previous season of People with a Passion, and he was starting a new company, and that's Brandon Stein. I'll put a link in the description to the video so people can watch the interview. It's one of my favorite interviews. Most people would be retiring at his age. And I said to him, like, why are you still building another company now? Which actually is an amazing story within itself, because he's improved on the company that he built over 30 years in the memorabilia industry. and even though he had some brilliant days that other people say that's got to be your best day, he said what motivates him is chasing that best day. So I love that you actually shared that.
You're talking about retirement. I'm 63. I go 64 this year. And the question comes up, when are you going to retire? And I'm like, when am I going to stop doing what gives me pleasure and is my passion?
Yeah.
I don't have a date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because why would I stop doing something that I've wanted to do since I was 17?
Mm-hmm.
And I love the process of media. I love mediating, helping people find solutions to their dilemma, to their crisis, to that emotional state that they can't figure out, and to sort of just be that witness to help them get to an agreement.
Yeah.
To me, it's magic.
Yeah. So you earlier mentioned that there's what you consider good outcomes and you chase the better outcomes. So I guess from my perspective, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I were to understand the two and how you've differentiated is that the good outcome would just be something that looks good on paper that everyone accepts, but the better outcome has all these other things connected to them, like better mental health, better outcomes for the others that are involved, like kids. So it's a bigger package to you?
It's not a rushed agreement.
Okay.
Because a good agreement can happen and where both sides say, yeah, we agree. And sometimes there's a buyer's remorse that happens afterwards. Sometimes they look at it and they're a year down the road and they're going, oh, that's not what I wanted. Whereas a better outcome is that they can sit there and go, we can now negotiate this. I love it when I can hear from a client that says, actually, we renegotiated our agreement and we didn't need you. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Because that meant that they learned something in the process that they didn't need the third party to help them get to an agreement.
Well, they probably removed a lot of the emotion.
Yeah.
You technically removed a lot of the emotion that now they're in a place where they can negotiate because you demonstrated that the emotions aren't in that agreement.
So they have a framework to work with, which is, and I love that for parties because, my role isn't to be indispensable.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to feel comfortable with the process so they're empowered.
Yeah.
Because I shouldn't be the one controlling it. You shouldn't have to come back to me and say, help me, hold my hand, help me. Because people don't need to be victims.
Yeah.
We all can stand in our own grace, our own power, and negotiate with respect and dignity with each other. And it's not just possible, it's the best way to do it.
Yeah. So what's a mediation that you've done that you were called into that you thought was a bizarre situation to be in? Have you had anything or any scenarios that were unusual? I'm just asking.
I'm just thinking, I've done human rights cases which have absolutely floored me listening to one side's perspective. And I'm going, didn't we get into the 20th century? Haven't we passed a lot of it? Wasn't there an Emancipation Proclamation? Wasn't there like an Emancipation Act of 1834 throughout the British Empire? And we're still having this attitude. That was a 3-day mediation that it took all of my concentration not to be emotionally and verbally violent with 5 white guys on one side of the table. Mm-hmm. I was just like, what the, right? And there was some cultural differences and it was just something that went on, but
Is there a time you've walked away from the mediation where you just realized that you're potentially not the person for this scenario? Is that ever?
I've actually been fired as a mediator in one instance where the parties felt that they didn't need the mediator, and I went, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
I have canceled a mediation in the process where it wasn't safe.
Okay.
I've done that where I've declared that I am not going to proceed because I don't feel it's safe for one of the parties. And there was just too much aggro. There was potential of violence. And I was like, nope, that's not happening because I can't ensure the safety. And I'm not going to put someone through the trauma of being subjected to a violent son of a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that is a judgment by me, but he really was unpleasant.
Yeah.
And I don't know what was causing that, but process, I know they ended up going to court and they had to have domestic violence orders put in place
Yeah,
and
okay.
protection orders and all sorts of stuff, which I know they're necessary, but I wish they weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah, because hitting anybody is unforgivable.
Hmm. Yeah.
No, there's no need for that. And coercive behavior, which is now in the legislation, why? No, we don't need to control another person. And it's about trusting and dialogue and openness, and it's hard when you don't know what that is.
Mhm.
And it's something that it's not something you can be taught overnight. It's a value that you have to learn.
You mentioned earlier that you, as in your divorce coaching or marriage coaching, that you can help people connect with the right types of people. So if someone's in that scenario, obviously you have the connections, but if they need to find those people, who are those people that you're actually connecting them with? You listed some before. Can you go through
Yep.
who you're looking for to help them navigate that process of separation?
All the things that someone would need to be able to navigate. So you're going to need a tax accountant. You're going to need a solicitor. You're going to need someone to help you with maybe a real estate agent if you got to rent somewhere or sell something. But at the same time, you also might need a psychiatrist or a psychologist and a therapist. You might need to find someone who's going to be a personal trainer for you. It's going to be tailor fit. So as a coach, it's working with a team around the person to get a holistic outcome. And it's my experience that the more quickly we can put a team around somebody, the quicker they get to heal. Also, the quicker they'll get to a negotiation. And eventually a mediator, won't be me, will be selected to help them mediate, and I can prepare them for the mediation process. As a mediator, I've got a client right now, we're finalizing the mediation process, but I've been coaching what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're getting the same feedback from the mediator, and they're going, oh, I already know all this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's putting a team around the individual because there's so many things that are going on. And we just focus often on just the money or taking care of the kids and forgetting what our own needs are.
Is it also a factor of not being in control? Because you're saying this is giving them a degree of control over their outcome. But do people get to this point because they feel like their life, which technically is falling apart, and they're almost clutching at straws without any rationale? It is just purely emotion. I want that, because they feel like they're losing everything.
I want him or I want her to pay for how I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So we like to drink the poison, hope they're going to die.
Yeah.
Right. And it's important for them to know that that's not an outcome that's going to ever happen. So there's a lot of reality checking, a lot of future thinking, acknowledging, okay, those things happened. We can't change that. So what are we going to do today? What are we planning for tomorrow? It's the idea of what's your best day going to look like? Okay, we'll put that forward. Mm-hmm. Right. So what are we doing today to build towards that? Have you gone for a walk? How's your meditation practice coming? Right? And someone says, well, I haven't gone to my yoga class for a couple of months. I'm like, so okay, so what do we? So it's really tailoring all the strength that they need around them to get them through, and know that they will get, and helping them understand they will get through this.
What is the best way for people to actually connect to you to take advantage of your skill set?
Easiest way is to look up my website, which is betteroutcomes.au. I also have a LinkedIn profile, Thaddeus Hollis, all one word, and that's really simple. And all the other information is available on the website or on LinkedIn.
I'll put a link in the description of where people can find you, and I really appreciate you being here today. Okay, bring this around. So I'll put a link in the description of where people can find you. I really appreciate you being here today. One of the things that I do here on People with Passion when I have in studio guest is to present a pin to those who come on the podcast. So a little memento. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and wisdom on mediation negotiation with the People with a Passion audience. Thanks, Thad.
Thanks, Greg. This is great. Cheers, mate.
Nice.
You too can learn how to be a successful content creator for reach, respect, and revenue. Join me, Craig Rowe, the founder of Applaudable Media, as I help you navigate the journey of creating your very own content. Subscribe to Modern Media Makers on YouTube to give voice to your brand and learn digital content strategies that work for you 24/7.